The curse of the ancestors. In the heart of the Igbo land, beneath the shadow of the rolling hills and fertile plains, there was a village where the scent of burning incense always mingled with the earthy scent of the soil. It was a place where the whispers of ancestors lingered like mist, where traditions were sacred, and the bond between the living and the dead was never to be broken. Adana and Ike Budo had grown up in this village, and since childhood, their hearts had been tethered to one another in ways they could not explain. Their love, though simple, was as strong as the ancient oaks that dotted the landscape. Their union had been foretold by the elders, and on the day they were to be married, the sun shone brightly, casting golden beams over the crowd of villagers who gathered to witness the joining of their souls. But as much as their love was blessed by the gods and elders, a shadow loomed over their happiness, one that neither of them could see coming. On the day of their wedding, the high priest, a tall man named Okeke, stood before the couple and spoke the sacred words that bound them together for eternity. His voice was deep and resonant as he invoked the ancestors. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of warning, that Adana could not ignore. His gaze lingered on the couple, and his lips quivered as though he were about to speak of something forbidden. Ike Budo, Adana, Okeke said, his voice trembling slightly, "You have both been chosen to fulfill a great destiny, but with this choice comes a heavy burden. There is an ancient tradition in our village, one that must never be broken. To break it would bring death, and not even the gods can save you." Adana's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Ike Budo, who squeezed her hand tightly, his face pale. The air around them seemed to hold its breath, and the villagers shifted nervously. "What tradition?" Ike Budo asked, his voice steady, though fear crept into his eyes. Okeke paused. His gaze seemed to drift to the mountains, where the ancestors were said to rest, and then back to the couple. "The tradition is simple," he said, his voice low. "In the sacred grove of our people, there is a tree that stands taller than any other. It is said to be the heart of our village. It must never be touched by the hand of a living soul, for if it is, the balance between life and death will be shattered. It is the tree of our ancestors. If you are to break this tradition, one of you will die." Adana felt her chest tighten. "What do you mean? Are you saying?" "Yes," Okeke said, his voice heavy with the weight of prophecy. "One of you will die if this tree is disturbed. It is not a curse, it is the will of the ancestors. Your love is pure, but if this tradition is broken, death will come swiftly, and no one can stop it." For a moment, the world seemed to freeze around them. The wedding guests murmured nervously, and the breeze that had carried the scent of the earth stilled, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Adana looked into Ike Budo's eyes. She could not imagine a life without him. He had been the one to hold her when her father died, the one who had whispered love into her ear as they grew together in the same village. He was her everything. "Do not fear," Ike Budo whispered. "I will not let anything come between us. We are destined for each other, and no tree, no tradition, will stop that." But as the days passed, the words of the high priest continued to haunt them both. It was a full moon night when the calamity struck. Adana and Ike Budo had been walking together in the forest, their love unbroken, their hearts intertwined. As they reached the grove, they stopped beneath the great tree that the high priest had warned them about. Its massive trunk seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, and the air around it was heavy with power. Ike Budo, in a moment of passion, stepped forward and placed his hand upon the rough bark. Adana's breath caught in her throat. "No," she cried, but it was too late. The ground beneath them trembled. The leaves rustled, and the air grew thick with an otherworldly presence. Adana felt the sudden, overwhelming weight of a curse descending upon them. She turned to Ike Budo, who looked at her in shock. His body began to tremble, his face contorting in pain as if something deep within him was being torn apart. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice strained. "I didn't mean to," but before he could finish, he collapsed to the ground, his eyes staring blankly into the sky. Adana knelt beside him, her heart shattering as she realized what had happened. Ike Budo had broken the tradition. The balance had been disturbed. The air was filled with the mournful wail of a distant spirit, and Adana knew then that the ancient curse had been fulfilled. As Ike Budo's life faded from him, Adana's world shattered. She screamed, but no one came to help. The villagers, bound by the rules of tradition, could only watch from afar as the curse claimed the life of the one she loved. In the days that followed, Adana's grief turned to a slow, aching death. She wandered the forest, lost in her sorrow, unable to understand why fate had been so cruel. She knew that she could never return to the village, for it had been her hand, too, that had allowed the breaking of the ancient law. On the day that she, too, succumbed to the curse, her body was found beneath the great tree, her fingers tracing the bark, as though she were reaching out to touch Ike Budo once more. The villagers, silent and somber, gathered around the tree. They mourned the loss of two souls bound by love and doomed by a forgotten tradition. The tree, which had once been the heart of the village, now stood as a silent witness to the price of love and death. And so, the ancestors watched, knowing that the balance had been restored. But at a terrible cost.